Welcome to Faith Fondue, a new podcast featuring me, author and speaker Haley DeMaria, and teacher and blogger Ann Strickers. Faith Fondue will feature a melting pot of topics, ignited by a flame, our faith, and guided by the Holy Spirit. Each week will feature a theme, and the theme for this week's episode is Lent, Week 1 Traditions. Ann, good morning. Welcome to our first week of Lent.
Morning, Haley. This is the week of February 21st, and I'm looking forward to talking about traditions. But before we get to that, maybe in terms of the flame and what's hot, I have exciting news. I got the vaccine yesterday, and I know you. Thank you. And I know you got yours in February, so you know what it's like to be in this place where you're like, relief, right? Gratitude, something we've all been waiting for, and for our listeners who haven't had it yet, you will get there, right? Then it's just a huge relief. And I was really struck. I thought it was an emotional experience as well. I don't know if you felt that way.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, it was kind of a surreal experience when I walked in. I got mine at the hospital. I know your location was a little different, but I walked in and it was this event that we had talked about and hoped about. And, for 10 months at that point, it was like, well, the vaccine. And, here we were getting the vaccine. But, it also seemed a little sci-fi-ish too. Everybody's masked up. I was in this very sterile white room. And but it is an emotional experience. At least it was for me too. And I saw a fellow colleague, another teacher, who happened to be there at the same time. And she was, pumping her arms and cheering. And, if we could have given hugs, we would have. I think especially for people who are in schools and with children and out and about, healthcare workers, who have to, be around other people, it is a relief. But it's a celebration. So I was excited that you were able to get it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because the site I went to was the Oakland Coliseum, and the Oakland Coliseum is where the Golden State Warriors play, Oakland Athletics. Obviously, the Warriors have moved to San Francisco, and the baseball hasn't started yet. The Raiders are gone. I've been there for several concerts. So this venue is organized. It's a FEMA site. So it's run by the supply is from the federal government. So it's open to anyone in the Bay Area. If you can get there driving or via BART, it is open. And there's a certain criteria. So yes, I'm a teacher, so I've qualified. But some people had real questions about, me even getting it there. And so before I kind of speak to that, when I drove in, when I talk about emotional, I just realized I was part of a historical moment. Like, this is something that people will be referencing in years to come. And, that's just an overwhelming feeling for anyone when you realize you're a part of something that's we're all in this together, right?
Yeah, but it's also, it's amazing that you recognize that. So often we might get caught up in a moment and then in hindsight look back and think, wow, that was a monumental event. But yeah, you're right. To recognize and honor it for what it is pretty cool.
Yeah, well, thanks. And I felt gratitude, relief, because I went back into the classroom this past week. We have obviously in California been much later, so there was a lot of excitement about students coming back to class, and not all teachers have gotten the vaccine yet. So based on where you live and the county you live in, there, for example, Santa Clara County is the 28th, but there has been, I've noticed, is the word judgment or, questioning about the vaccine. And it's, one friend actually told me, Haley, not to tell people I was getting the vaccine. And she said, you will be judged. And she's gotten snide remarks, snarky comments about getting it. She's in law enforcement, so she got that. And I thought that is really unfortunate that some people can't share in that moment of just like, this is good for all of us as a public health measure. And, as long as I get mine, that's kind of the attitude. Well, then I can be happy for you. I was discouraged by that, and I don't want to focus in on that because I don't think that's the majority of people. Most people were relieved. They know that I'm a teacher, that I'm a coach. I work with young people, so there wasn't a lot of questioning. But it just points to part of our humanity where even in myself, you kind of do wonder when we strike those judgments. It's not a good place. We hope for people to stay healthy and be better, but I want to acknowledge that it's part of this experience as well.
Yeah, and we always say not judging is so hard, but it's really important because we never understand the full scope of what somebody's going through. I mean, you could be in line and see, a younger person getting the vaccine, and somebody might look and wonder why they're able to get it. When we should be focusing on the elderly or the more high at risk. But we never really know. What someone is going through. You always go back to, Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird. You never really
Yes.
understand someone until you've walked in their shoes. And I don't appreciate the judgment either. This is, we're really facing a shift here in this pandemic where, for so long, for so many months, it's been about the collective good and keeping other people safe. And with this vaccine, we're going to put the onus back on the high risk people who possibly can't get the vaccine. And I worry we're going to go back to this very selfish world that we were in before, where, if I'm vaccinated, then I'm good. But it still doesn't work that way. We still have to think of the greater good. So it's, you would hope in many ways this pandemic would bring people together. I think it's been way more divisive than
Yeah.
it needed to
Yes.
be, and way more divisive than actually bringing people together. I think some pockets have banded, certainly families and friends in ways, but ultimately I hope we learn some non-judgmental lessons when it comes to just life in general, but hopefully we'll learn that from this.
Yeah, I agree. And I would just, advise people to encourage one another, exhort one another. It is easy to focus in, even on this, like, I don't want to focus on the negative. I want to recognize it. But, we have to, if we really are people of hope, we have to go there. And, Shawshank Redemption is one of my favorite movies, but, Red, one of the main characters, says, hope is a good thing. He said, hope is a dangerous thing, but but it's a good thing, and no good thing ever dies. And I can see kind of in this moment, like, we have hope, and I can see that there can be some danger in it. Like, we are hopeful. We have to be hopeful in order to move forward. Sure, there's a chance that, people will continue to get sick. People won't get vaccinated. There will be cracks in the system where there's, an injustice to who gets it and when. But bottom line, the numbers are falling. We are moving towards, right, a healthier country and community. And I really appreciate what you said there about, like, we're divided, but I think that's true, but I hope we choose not to be. And that's up to us, I think.
It is, and that is, that's the great gift that we have is free will and choice. So hopefully we'll all make those choices in a positive way.
Yeah. So I'll flex I went dominant arm because I sleep on my left side. And a friend, as a golfer too, I use my I'll use that arm today and get the blood pumping. And I want to thank my the workers that were there. I talked to both the firemen. It was a Cal fireman that was kind of assisting the nurse, and she was there from 8 to 7 yesterday. So I want to thank them and pray for them for their hard work. And wow, those Cal Fire, they have had a lot of work between, wildfires, flooding, and now vaccines. So we're grateful. And he thanked me for the work I do. And I thought, geez, no, thank you. So
Yeah, well, and that's where we should go, right? Is that place of gratitude and not judgment, because it is remarkable to see the infrastructure that's in place, and it's not perfect everywhere. Nothing is, but the infrastructure to roll out this vaccine is extraordinary, and people really are doing extraordinary work and working long hours above and beyond to keep everybody else safe. It's really neat to see.
yeah. Well, quick question before we move, Haley. I didn't know this. So you're not supposed to take a photograph of yourself while you're getting the vaccine?
So we were asked to not take photographs in of the location. So I think what they don't want is taking pictures that could show other people. So it just so happened when I got my second dose, in this huge room with individual tables, they happened to sit me down right next to a colleague that I work with every day. And so we thought that was great that of all the people there. So we did take a selfie of the two of us,
Okay.
6 feet apart with our masks on. But at a different location, when I pulled in, the one thing they said was, please no photographs. So I think what they don't want is pictures of the site in case there are people who, haven't agreed to have their picture taken.
I understand. That makes sense.
I'd already taken a picture, but I stopped after that because it's fascinating. It's really amazing to see.
It is. It is.
The government at work, because sometimes we wonder how they're working, and they are.
Well, it's funny where, because now we live in a time where people take photographs at any time, any place. And it just sparked a memory when I was in Israel, and, we actually went over to Palestine. We went to Bethlehem, and people were taking selfies. Like, they have this place that's designated as the place where Jesus was born. Right. And I don't think of myself as a skeptical person, but I was like, really, this is the site? Like, we know that this is the place, and people are taking the selfie like of themselves. And I thought, I raised the question, like, is this the time or place? I mean, they wanted to remember it, so I understand, but I was also like, can't we just let this be holy and sacred? And I don't know that applies to getting a vaccine, but I would certainly be respectful of any, I wanted to have a picture of it, but I also thought, I don't know, I'll just
enjoy the moment. Yeah,
exactly.
Yes,
you got it.
Yes.
So, yeah.
All right. So this week was exciting for you, of course, to get the vaccine. It was also last week, Ash Wednesday. I was not able to go to Mass in person, but I did attend our little virtual parish online. And took Father Tom, the priest that we attend Mass with, took his advice about how to create ashes at home, and yours as well. So one of the Father Tom had asked us to write down everything that was most meaningful to us. You had mentioned something along the lines of, let's put down our sins, let's put down our vices, let's burn those up and offer them up. I did both. I put my little tray of ashes in front of my computer screen so that Father Tom could bless them, and then was really happy to have ashes to wear out that day, running errands, going to work. I had one other colleague who also had ashes on her forehead, and, I work at an Episcopal school, so they do give ashes in the Episcopal Church as well, but perhaps not as faithful as the Catholics do. But I loved having them, and I didn't love that about myself. I didn't love kind of that pride, I hate to use that word, of being able to have received ashes and to share that faith with everyone, my faith with everyone that day. And of course, I just heard that reading that we talked about, that of course I love, which is not letting my right hand know what my left hand was doing, and not being outward and vocal and boastful about praying or almsgiving or whatever we're asked not to do. But here I was with these ashes, ready to go out into the world and showcase them. So I barely made it 2 hours into Lent without letting my left hand know what my right hand was doing.
I love that you call yourself. Yeah.
But it was a neat day, again, not being raised Catholic. We didn't really ever receive ashes growing up. That wasn't really part of Lent for me, but I did have my grandfather, my mom's father, was Catholic, and his faith was very important to him. And he would talk about it and lived it. It, was a daily, communicant. He went to Mass every day. He and my grandmother used to live with us for 6 months of the year. So, talked a lot about, his faith, and I was very aware of it. So it's interesting as I look back on, my childhood and the way I was raised and what Lent meant to us. As non-Catholics, we still gave something up. It was, something like Slurpees or chocolate, or it was really just giving it up, but we never talked about why we did that. It was just we gave something up. So there wasn't a lot of theological meaning behind it, or there wasn't necessarily a real connection to why we do this as part of our faith. But we did, and we didn't eat meat on Fridays because my grandfather would be there and he wasn't eating meat on Fridays. But we also for us, we wouldn't eat, I can't remember if we would not eat meat on Ash Wednesday. I don't know if I knew if that was part of our tradition. My mom always made lentil soup, which, again, I thought was just what everybody did during Lent. I don't think there is any religious or theological connection between Lent and lentils. But again, that was just something we did. But I do think it's a simple meal. It's an easy, um, you know, type of food to make, create
Sure.
for, the simple meals that we're asked to eat. Of course, there's no meat in it, although you can add meat. So I did make my lentils this week. Kind of a paying homage to my childhood and those Lenten traditions that we had. But really kind of an interesting reflection for me to think about, what are my Lenten traditions? How was I raised? Not being raised Catholic, what does that mean? What did that mean to me? And what I saw were a lot of these Catholic influences that I'm not even really sure I knew I had,
Mm.
but clearly made an impact.
Wow. Well, I think for young people, it is totally okay to, I think it's actually a great gift, a wonderful way just to engage a young person in these traditions and in these rituals. And in due time, as you are able to reason and understand and hopefully appreciate, to talk about why we do them. So the very fact that you were part of something and then later in your own life, you connect the dots and you probably wanted to. And I don't know, maybe I find it frustrating when people complain, like, I had no idea why we did this. Well, part of that is on us, I think, to have a sense of curiosity. I know somebody who says that's the best quality you can have in a child is a sense of wonder, awe, and curiosity. And I think because it's a virtue, it can be cultivated. So, we hope, I mean, I hope as a teacher, and I'm sure you feel so, that we cultivate a sense of curiosity. And how we would do that is another topic, but that you were part of something and then later in your life, you're appreciating it. And, one easy way that came to mind, one of the traditions I had growing up was Operation Rice Bowl. And that's that simple, cardboard box that's on your table, or somewhere in your home. And it's run by Catholic Relief Services, Operation Rice Bowl. Well, CRS is the kind of relief and agency of the Catholic Church. And I think it's 75% of their efforts go overseas. So 25% is within the US. So they literally give people meals. They feed people in places of the world where there's extreme poverty. And one of the things I appreciate about ORB, Operation Rice Bowl, now is that not only do they have the box, but they have recipes. And the recipe will be of a meatless meal, a simple meal. So I'd be curious, I'm certain there's a meal with lentils, and it might be from Madagascar or Kuala Lumpur, and it'll profile a child and what he or she, what is it like where they live, and maybe what do their parents do. And then in this country, meat is not necessarily expensive, but in many parts of the world it is. And that's why we give it up during Lent, because giving up meat, not only does it, decrease our footprint, our carbon footprint, but it's really associated with people with wealth. And so we align ourselves with the poor when we opt in for meatless meals like lentils, or in my case, fish sticks, which I hated.
Oh, but they
The
were
Jordan's
so good.
fisherman. So terrible.
They really are, but I loved them growing up, and I have never given them to my kids because the thought of them just, bleh. But yeah, we ate those too.
Yes. Yeah.
But and I appreciate what you said, because you're right. Even with my own children, I feel like I'm just trying to give them a base and a foundation, for some sort of faith that they can build on in their own way. And so that's clearly what I had. Even if it might not be what I look back on and think, I clearly look back on it differently as an adult, as we all would. But certainly as a child, I did have that very interestingly strong kind of Catholic rooted, grounded foundation of what Lent is,
Yeah.
even not being raised Catholic. So just priming me for my adult life.
Absolutely. Well, I think of, when we talk about traditions, I haven't, so I lived, in South Louisiana. We talked about this with Mardi Gras. Fish, fish fries, fish Fridays were a big deal. And I think that's a great community tradition. I think it's also popular in the Midwest. It really hasn't been one, but I do miss my parish. We always have a crab feed. And in the Bay Area, especially in San Francisco Bay Area, crab feeds, or in particular, cioppino is like a crab stew. That's just a great tradition. And I'm not a big meat eater, but Haley, once I can't have it on a Friday, you can't believe how often they've been like, oh man. And I don't know, a small part of me is disappointed when my friends forgo that practice. I just think it's I think I don't know if it's a strong identity piece, but it's something that is just so ingrained in me as, I am a cradle Catholic, and it's part of this practice of this season of 40 days. So,
Well, and it's because it's not that hard, right? It's one day a week.
so true.
So
Right.
it's not like you're asking people to go somewhere, or it's just one. So it's one day a week. I'm sure that, I mean, maybe people do eat meat every single day. I'm probably not one of those people. So it probably isn't as hard. But yeah, you're right. It doesn't seem like it should be a difficult thing for people to do, because I think what they're choosing to is intentionally eat meat, right? They're actually making the conscious decision to do it. And I don't know, you may know this. I learned this recently within the past year or so. Did you know that McDonald's created their fillet of fish for
Oh,
Lent?
no.
Yes, for
Oh,
Lent on
yeah,
Fridays in Lent. Yes.
that's awesome.
Because they saw a dip in sales on Fridays
Yeah.
during Lent.
Yeah.
And so they came up
Right.
with their fillet of fish, which, that I will not be eating.
Yeah, same here. But that's a fun fact. It's a very fun fact. And I guess I would just add, I don't mean to sound judgy, but I guess my disappointment is that it is a mindfulness and it's an awareness. So I would just hope, whether or not I don't know, if they're not practicing, then it's not part of their mindfulness. But I would just, for those that do, I would hope that there's an awareness, and we've all forgotten. So please don't take it that way. Like, oh, I'm judging my friend who had spaghetti and meatballs. But, it couldn't be easier, especially in the Bay Area, to have non-meat as an option. But I just think it's that sense of, I'm part of something, and you are too, and we both understand that about each other when we're practicing a certain practice during this time of the year. So there are many ways to, right, participate in spiritual discipline during Lent. Giving up meat is just one way. My parish has soup and stations, so they have stations of the cross followed by soup in the parish hall. Again, not this year, but I do like that tradition. I think that's um, a great way to bring people together for
Yeah.
prayer and
Well,
fellowship.
which is so important and part of our faith. And I know one of the things that everybody is really missing at this point is that community aspect, right? The fish fries were created because you had to have, not have meat on Fridays, and fish was an easy thing to do. But really, that's a community event. It has very little to do with the fish. It was just probably a reason, an excuse to come together as a community. So we'll keep in mind and in our prayers people who are missing those, physical outreaches and times of community right now.
What a great reminder. Yes. Um, so just an article that we'll post. I thought this was really interesting when we're talking about traditions. David Brooks is one of my favorite writers. He writes quite often for the New York Times, kind of a sociologist, written a number of books. But when we're talking about traditions, he talks about places that really shape people and become part of their identity. And they are known as thick institutions. And this is its own topic in and of itself. But, when we talked about traditions, Haley, I was like, oh, I wonder what she's going to mention about Notre Dame, because people mentioned like Notre Dame is known for having so many traditions, and that's part of what makes it special. And I certainly believe that our alma mater qualifies as a thick institution. So this is a place that engages head, heart, hands, right? And it's something that you may have spent time there, and it really affects your outlook on yourself. And you are connected to those people that you've shared the thick institution with in a way that's unlike others. So I'll let folks read the article, but one of the criteria is it has rituals, collective rituals. It has shared tasks. It has like an origin story, like a way of like understanding where this place came from. And then it also has kind of something idiosyncratic about it. And I think that that's one of the pieces that speaks to me. I mean, don't get me wrong. If you said I have, Four Seasons, I have a hotel room for you at the Four Seasons or the Ritz for 4 days, I would never not take it. But these thick institutions usually aren't perfect. There's something about them that might challenge you, and they actually connect people. So I think traditions at their best, we're talking about community here. We're talking about identity when we're thinking of ourselves as Catholic. Traditions are certainly part of that, and places can cultivate and pass on those traditions, which are they really connect people and build relationships. So enhance relationships, I should say.
So we'll definitely post that article, and I need to read it as well. I'm curious as to where he came up with the term thick. Why he chose that particular word as part of this article. But yeah, it sounds pretty fascinating, and for sure, I'm sure we can all think of organizations that have left that imprint on us. Yeah, certainly Notre Dame for both of us, for sure.
Yeah. So enjoy that.
I will. I will. So moving on to our spiritual stew, I was looking at different readings for the week. And of course, I'm in my year of the saints this year, where I'm trying to learn more about the saints. And I learned that February 22nd, this week, is the Feast of the Chair of St. Peter at Antioch. And I thought that was interesting. It's not the feast of St. Peter. St. Peter doesn't have a feast day. It's St. Peter and Paul. There's a couple of feast days to the chair of St. Peter. So I learned more about this. I read more because I wanted to learn more about it. There's actually 5 days of the year that we honor Peter. 2 for the chair, 2 with St. Paul, the main one being in June. And then the 5th one is August 1st, which is the feast of St. Peter in chains, recognizing, honoring, and celebrating the time when he was in prison, being persecuted by King Herod, and the angel comes down and breaks him free of his chains, which I thought was interesting as well. So I've really enjoyed learning about the saints. So, we hear, we'll hear in the readings this week on February 22nd, on the feast day of St. Peter, or the chair of St. Peter, the words, from Matthew that Jesus says, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. The gates of the netherworld shall not prevail against it." We hear those words so often, upon this rock I will build my church. That's the beginning of our faith. That's the beginning of the Catholic Church. That's where it all started. They seem like very simple words, and we hear them often. Again, upon this rock I will build my church. But wow, that's it. That's our faith and the beginning of our church right there. And recognizing and honoring and having this feast day for the chair of St. Peter really gives us this image of, this chair and this lineage that's been passed down through the popes throughout the years that is unbroken. And that's pretty powerful. It's pretty neat when you think about it. So kind of neat to have that be this week in those readings in terms of the gospel, celebrating truly the words that founded our church.
Well, I think that's such a great image, Haley, to sit with. No pun intended. Oh my gosh. I thought that's good. Because one of my, in the Old Testament and in the song, O come, Emmanuel, you hear a number of names for the Lord. And one of them is, O seat of wisdom. So to think of this chair, it just conjures up this image of oftentimes a wise person is an elderly person and they sit, right? And even just, in the Greeks, they have the oracle at Delphi. And it's a person that you visit who's sitting in this chair. So it's an irony that Peter, Cephas, who becomes Peter, is this wise person, because what we know about him from scripture is that he's rather impetuous and a very, you might not think of him as a wise person, but he is, yes, the first pope. And they call it the Petrine office as a result of his legacy. So he is someone, maybe, when I'm thinking of our leaders this week, at schools, in our communities, I'll pray to St. Peter for them. So thank you for reminding us to continue to pray with the saints.
Well, and so for me, on a side note, it was also really interesting. I love when biblical references make their way into pop culture. So when I read the passage from Matthew, "You are Peter, upon this rock I will build my church. The gates of the netherworld shall not prevail against it." That's the netherworld is used at times. You don't hear it very often. There's other translations where the word hell is used. That's probably a more mainstream word. But for those of us who spend time with kids, whether they're your own or in the classroom or nephews and nieces, there is a wildly popular video game, Minecraft, that has really kind of exploded in a mainstream way, and they have a place called the Nether. And the Nether is the underworld. It is filled with lava. It is filled with dark creatures. In my son's word, it's basically Minecraft's version of hell. But I thought that was really fascinating because you hear a lot of kids talking about, as they're playing their video games, the Nether and the Nether, and let's try to get out of the Nether, and we have to build something to, escape the Nether. And, I don't even think they realize that they are referring to really a very biblical, serious place. It is hell, but the Nether has made its way into pop culture, and I always kind of think that's neat.
I think that's remarkable. I think anytime we can connect the dots, and that's a big part of being an Ignatian educator, is really going to where there's kind of this paradigm that they use as a Jesuit educator, and it's really for any educator, that you go to their space and you speak their language in order to relate to them. So that is a wonderful tool, and just connection, Haley. And the only thing I would say, it doesn't have to be necessarily teenagers. A lot of MLB, Major League Baseball players, play Minecraft. And I know that because I am not a video game fan, but I am obviously a sports fan. So Shohei Ohtani, he's from Japan, and he's this pitcher and he's a hitter. And apparently he's like outstanding at some video game. And it really, his love of this video game connected him to his teammates. So I always find whatever the mechanism is by which you can relate and connect to others, go there. And so maybe when I will be teaching about, because I teach ethics, so we do talk about hell, and that is a very strong word. So maybe I'll speak to the netherworld instead.
Yeah, well, and I love the fact that Minecraft didn't call it hell, right? They called it the Nether,
right,
and they didn't even use the Nether world. So
right.
I would. How great would it be to have been a part of that conversation with whoever was designing this game, however many years ago? What are we going to call this place? Let's call it the Nether. How did that come up? Be kind of fascinating to know.
Absolutely. Well, for my part of the spiritual stew, I speak about Matthew Kelly pretty regularly, part of Dynamic Catholic. I love his series, Best Let Ever. He has a quick, morning reflection. And his reflection that resonated with me this week was about the reality of temptation. So Jesus goes into the desert for 40 days to prepare himself for his ministry. And he's in solitude and he's in prayer. And we know from scripture that he was tempted. So even the Lord was tempted, and there's that dialogue with the devil. And Matthew Kelly gives a piece of advice. He says, when you are tempted, do not dialogue, and stop right there. And then he's like, because you will not win. And I thought that that's very wise. There are some people that are very strong. They have, fortitude, and they're resilient, but the majority I'll speak for myself. I think he's right. The devil has power in that sense. If you lean in just give me a little bit, just start talking a little bit, and then it becomes more. And I think that's part of why, I do something during Lent, but I also give something up. And for me, I give up sweets. And I only did it because one of my colleagues, teacher and coach, she did it, and she talked about how hard it was. And I was ready for the challenge because that's kind of my Achilles heel. And I feel that temptation. I literally feel my body wants the sugar. And the other night, I have this pound of frozen cookie dough, and it's wrapped in this cling wrap. And I looked at it and I just wanted a little taste. And there the dialogue began. And I literally leaned in and I closed the door, and then I went back, and then I saw how the cling wrap was clutching the dough and how hard it would be to open it. And by God, wouldn't you know, I lost the battle. I took a bite of frozen cookie dough. It's so pathetic, but I offer that because that is a metaphor. I mean, that is really what temptation is and we can see that in ourselves. And so, it might start with cookie dough, but whatever we are tempted by, and we are all tempted. And I think if we don't recognize that, then it's a disservice to ourselves. So I will probably stay with that image of cookie dough when I face a temptation, whatever that may be. It can be something as simple as not telling the truth about my score in golf, which, that's dumb because it's the only person it affects is me, so to speak. But it starts there, and it gets it's a continuum. And I think young people understand that. They just need to be reminded of it. And I need the reminder too.
Well, and I think what you say, circles back to what you had mentioned before, when we were talking about giving something up and, and what we model for our children. So yes, maybe I just gave something up as a child and didn't know the reason behind it, but it's still a reminder that we are doing something because of our faith, and we are doing something because we are trying to be closer to God. And the greatest thing about our faith is, redemption, forgiveness. So, you've been forgiven for that bite of cookie dough that you've had. And we tend to not forgive ourselves, very easily, but we forgive others a lot faster than we can forgive ourselves. I too gave up desserts, sweets, I guess is a better answer. That's a tough one for me. I love my sugar. And I accidentally took a handful of chocolate chips and popped them in my mouth. And as soon as I put them in my mouth, I thought, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And then I thought, well, I could spit them out. And I thought, no, I've already eaten them. And then I thought, well, now that I've already had a handful, I might as well just go back for more. But I didn't.
Yeah. Oh,
I
yeah,
didn't.
okay.
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I thought, well, it's Saturday. That's kind of close to Sunday. Maybe I could rationalize away anything. But really, what it does is it creates an awareness that we are Catholic and we have given something up, and we are doing it to honor, God and Jesus and his sacrifices for us. And, any awareness that can create that, I think, is a good thing.
Yeah. And I guess I left this out. The idea that Matthew Kelly brings up too is that when we engage with temptation, we're talking to the devil, we're not talking to God. So if this helps as an image, our back is turned toward God. And he's like, ultimately, that's not the best version of ourselves. So we're distracted. So I think his advice is right. Like, don't even engage in the dialogue. Don't even turn the back. I mean, some would say you have to acknowledge the temptation. I mean, that's just imprudent. But when we turn our back on God, we are turning from the best version of ourselves. That's a big part of his teaching, his theology, that God wants us to be the best version of ourselves. So the temptations that I face, like that prevent me from being the best version of myself, are going to be different than yours. And they're going to be different than somebody else's, but we all have our temptations. And I do think we have to acknowledge that. And yeah, pay attention to the interplay, and where do you rely on God in any of that?
So next time you open the door to your freezer, you can use the image that you are opening the door to the Nether. I will think of that as I'm opening my pantry. Anything that is in there that I shouldn't be eating, is coming from the netherworld.
Yes.
And we are all tempted, and we will all fail, and we will all sin, and we will all wake up the next day and carry on.
Yes. By the grace of God, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So this week I'm going to, I'm actually going to learn a little bit more about Minecraft. I'm going to try the Minecraft Nether. I'm going to figure out where that's coming from. I'm going to really think about and pray for our church, as we celebrate the feast of the chair of St. Peter and the founding of our church. I think there's, a lot of healing that needs to be done in our church, people, the leadership of our church, all of us, sinners in the church as well. I'll be praying for them. And I love the idea of, honoring the vaccine workers and people who are from top to bottom on the ground, and those creating the infrastructure and putting those plans in place. It's a great reminder for us to really think about the work that they're doing, and the service that they're giving to others, in the cold, in the rough weather, putting
Right.
their lives at risk, really every day, to pray for and honor them as well.
Yeah. And I'm going to pray specifically with St. Peter in mind as I pray for leaders, specifically the leaders at the school where I work, or any, leader that we encounter. Obviously for our country, our local governments. San Francisco it's just, the city's struggling. So, instead of the complaining, I think it's really a time for prayer. And I was thinking I would like to offer a message of hope. It is very easy to talk about the inefficiency of the vaccine rollout and to complain and to relay stories of the brokenness. But I don't think that serves people. It takes actually, I think, a little bit of courage to spread messages of optimism right now, but we really need it. And I just, even, any sort of message of hope or optimism, like, for example, housing costs in the Bay Area are really expensive. And I told this positive story about a house to one of my dearest friends, and she's like, "Oh, I didn't think your story was going to end that way." And I said, like, this couple I work with, they're both teachers. The family accepted their offer because they're teachers. And it was such a great story, and it's like, you don't hear those very often. And
That is a great
you know,
story.
you don't hear them very often because they're not happening that often. But when they are, we have to share them. We do. And so I will try to um, have the courage to share, messages of hope where appropriate, and just listen when people are struggling, because that's real too.
Yeah, for sure. And there is a lot of struggle in many different ways right now, and they all need our prayers. So lots of praying this week. Next week we will continue to talk about Lent. We're going to move through over the next 3 weeks the 3 different aspects of Lent and what we're asked to do in terms of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. We'll dive deeper into those. But we'll just continue this week, hopefully avoiding our sweets, our netherworld of the pantry and the freezer, and not being tempted. I love the idea of that when you're tempted, what you shared, you're turning your best, you're turning your back on God, and you're not showing your best self. So that's a great image to keep in mind as well. But as always, Anne, it's been fun, and I look forward to our conversation next week.
Likewise. Thanks, Haley.